Hi, my name is Anne, and welcome to the worst of all possible worlds.
Well, hi there. My name is Joshua Thomas Borman, but most folks just call me Bosch. Hey, tell you what, how about you get the whole family together? You're gonna want to fucking die once you're finished listening to the worst of all possible worlds.
His main characteristic is apparently to feel superior to children.
He got to his dick's end.
Yeah, he got to his dick's end.
John Avery Whitaker is a big old butt slut.
It's like all Mormons. Like all the contestants are Mormons. Well, hey, how's it going, everybody? I am the worst of all possible Joshes.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And I'm the worst of all possible Bryans.
And we are bringing you something a little bit different today. And I think, AJ, you had some words that you wanted to say to sort of lead us off here.
Yeah, we're starting this mini-series on Adventures in Odyssey.
Oh, you think it's mini?
Well, for the time being, I've decided to call this particular mini-series Whit's Endless Summer.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Great.
How do we feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's all right. Just a rip-off of Beach Boys' Endless Summer, obviously, but most of what Adventures in Odyssey does is a rip-off. So I'm happy to just, jump right into it if y'all are.
Yeah, we should probably give some background on like what this show is, yeah.
This is our intro to Odyssey.
Yeah.
So most episodes of Adventures in Odyssey, if you're familiar with the show in any way, they are an illustration of some kind of a life lesson. My favorite thing about Adventures in Odyssey's early episodes is that you always have Chris to come in to explain the life lesson after it's been illustrated. And then to sweeten that a little bit, she then gives you an illustration to drive home the summary that she made to drive home the illustration that was already there to summarize whatever someone said at the beginning of the episode.
Some sort of a cheeky little anecdote in these early episodes, at least. And they are uniformly terrible.
Including this one from Connie Goes to Town, which features the worst child actor to ever work on Adventures in Odyssey in all 900 some of its episodes. Just bask in this glory.
What do you mean foolish? You can get a bike anywhere. But Frankie said this is the only imagined state there is.
Just terrible.
Awful.
Fun fact, that child actor, Ray Liotta.
That's how long this has been around. Also, this kid mentions Frankie, who then at the beginning of this episode is at wit's end. It's this fully integrated universe because Chris actually lives in Odyssey.
Chris lives in Odyssey, right. Chris is a resident of Odyssey, although later on she does sort of take a step back and she just becomes like the omniscient narrator.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about Chris a little bit more because I think she lives an incredibly cursed life, but we don't have to do that right now.
No, we'll get to Chris and her whole thing in a little bit. I think what I want to do first, before we start talking about sort of what the show even is for people who are probably confused by now, is just to frame up front like what Adventures in Odyssey is, where it came from, and why the hell we wanted to do a show about it to begin with. So in order to understand Focus on the Family, you first have to understand James Dobson. Now, James Dobson is a psychologist. He is now old as shit. He was born in 1936, so that
I'm
means
pretty sure
that
he always was.
He's always been
shit.
old. Yeah, he's always been old.
He always was and always will be.
Exactly.
Like, I think he went around like elementary school like, your parents aren't beating you enough.
For sure. He got his undergrad at Point Loma, which is a Christian university, and then earned his PhD from USC, the University of Southern California, in 1967. And at that point became an accredited psychologist.
This is 2 podcast episodes in a row that I have to be ashamed of California. And I apologize on behalf of all of San Diego for spawning.
Oh, yeah, Point Loma's in San Diego, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Cool. So he started then his practice as a practicing psychologist at the Children's Hospital at USC.
Those poor kids.
Yeah, no kidding. And he did that for about a decade. And in 1970, so this would be 3 years after he got his PhD, he published a book called Dare to Discipline. And Dare to Discipline is exactly what it sounds like. It was basically an evangelical argument that the best way to raise a child is to set firm boundaries. And the only good way to enforce those boundaries is basically by beating your kids when they fall out of line. Here's a quote. "Pain is a marvelous purifier. It is not necessary to beat the child into submission. A little bit of pain goes a long way for a young child. However, the spanking should be of sufficient magnitude to cause the child to cry genuinely."
So this is really funny. What Josh did was not actually quote James Dobson. This is from The 100 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade.
Yeah.
No, but that really is. That is actually a quote from Dare to Discipline. It's on like page 6.
I mean, you gotta lead with your best stuff, right? You gotta lead with the number one hit.
It's like a concert, right?
Yeah, play the hits, and then you can do experimental in the middle, and then you end with a banger. But that explains so much about Whit's character in this a lot, because he's supposed to be like an old folksy like hero, right? Like there's this sense of he is the wise one who dispenses all the information and solves every problem. He's literally
played by an actor from the Andy Griffith Show,
right? Like wholesome incarnate, but there are just flashes and moments where it's just like, this man is hit children.
Right. Which is how it should be, because that's how you discipline a child. You dare to discipline. So anyway, Dobson sort of became well regarded in evangelical circles after the publication of Dare to Discipline, and ended up stepping away from private practice in 1976, which he did to found Focus on the Family. Focus on the Family being an organization basically dedicated to advancing and preserving so-called traditional Judeo-Christian values, right?
And it should be worth noting that the pro-life movement, as we understand it, started in 1976.
Right.
Focus on the Family, since the beginning, has always been deeply embedded within the Republican Party.
Absolutely.
It's not just a conservative organization. It is an explicitly Republican organization, and it remains to this day.
It is a fundamentalist, Christian, conservative, Republican-aligned organization. So Focus on the Family, Dobson founded in 1977 in Pomona, California. And in 1983...
Oh my God, Pomona?
Yeah, man. Which is also where they record Odyssey, by the way.
No way.
Yeah.
They don't record it in Colorado Springs?
No, in Pomona.
What the... Okay. Well, I guess that's how they get the big Hollywood actors in it.
Road trip boys.
Anyway, after founding Focus on the Family, he then moved on and founded the Family Research Council, which you might have heard of. Its president is a man named Tony Perkins, who is one of the biggest closet cases in all of American politics. I mean,
he was great in Psycho. I do have to say. And his screenplay for The Last of Sheila is extremely underrated, him and Sondheim.
This man is absolutely obsessed with gay people and like the supposed gay agenda and like these gays being out to indoctrinate your kids, right? That's kind of his whole thing. The Family Research Council continued to be involved and is still involved in advocating for conservative politics and a conservative social approach in the government. They were instrumental in Prop 8 in California. That's just kind of their whole thing. You know, get the gays out of our government and out of our school system and out of our everything. That's like the number one thing that they're known for. So that's the Family Research Council. And then Dobson's national profile was raised considerably when he secured the final television interview. This was the day before Ted Bundy was executed. He got the final TV interview with Ted Bundy. Bundy played this fucking guy like a fiddle.
Oh, that's right.
Bundy's whole thing in talking to a very credulous James Dobson was like, the porno made me do it. That was like his whole...
Yeah, the porno and the drinking.
Honestly, I wish they would get into porno a little bit more, because these people need to loosen the fuck up.
No kidding.
Jesus Christ.
Just get some poppers, open up a browser tab, and go to town on yourself.
Just make it happen. Just like fucking
get loose.
Take it up the ass once. Like, make it happen.
Slip it up there, man. You'll find out.
The prostate is designed to be stimulated for a reason.
That's the first time you penetrate your own asshole while masturbating is the moment that you find out that there isn't a God. and it's actually transcendent.
That's actually the slogan for a lot of like mainline poppers is poppers. There is no God.
Well, that's also the slogan for the homosexual agenda, which of course is why Focus on the Family is so dedicated to opposing it. So after interviewing Bundy, Dobson's national profile was raised considerably, and he was able to take advantage of this to move Focus on the Family from California to Colorado Springs. And this happened during the years 1990 and 1991. They ended up building this massive complex, and I've been there. It's a beautiful, beautiful campus on the side of a mountain in Colorado Springs.
It has a slide.
It has a slide. It has a tiny Whit's End inside of it, actually. And that's not a joke. It is also alongside the primary Focus on the Family is an org called Focus on the Family Action, which ended up being called Citizen Link later on, and now it's called something else entirely.
It sounds like a surveillance organization. 100% Link.
It's less aggressively anti-gay than the FRC, but it is still very much an advocacy org that promotes, traditional Judeo-Christian values, whatever the fuck that means. So all this is to say, James Dobson is like one of the last of the remaining true old school culture warriors, right? Like Jerry Falwell obviously kicked it a few years back.
P-Rob, he's still there.
What?
Pat Robertson.
P-Rob's still out there, but, Billy
Baker
Graham
is out there
it.
too, but Baker was marginalized when it came out that, he was embezzling funds to pay off a woman he raped.
Right. But Billy Graham has kicked it. Franklin Graham doesn't have the clout of his father.
Yeah.
And
Oral Roberts has been dead a long time.
Oral Roberts is dead. But just to really give you a sense of like where Dobson's head is at, here's a quote from 2004, where it was a rally for Senator Tom Coburn, who was running against a Democrat at the time for re-election to the Senate. Homosexuals are not monogamous. They want to destroy the institution of marriage. It will destroy marriage. It will destroy the earth.
That's right, James.
It's such a huge leap from marriage will be destroyed to Armageddon. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like marriages end all the time and the world's ending, but it's not because of people not sleeping together.
Well, that's what you've got wrong. It actually is that.
Actually, the very first episode of the Proto Adventures in Odyssey, the sort of 12-part pilot thing that we might get into sometime later, is just Whit lamenting about a kid's parents getting divorced. And it's just the worst fucking thing that could have ever happened. It's like this horrible tragedy.
If there's one note I could give to Whit, and I have a lot of things I want to say directly to him, and I will later, but the number one thing I would say is, mind your fucking business, man.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with you.
That's a running theme.
Give me my fucking ice cream and shut the fuck up.
And speaking of ice cream, if we're all ready, let's get into that first episode we listened to. Connie Comes to Town.
Absolutely.
How nice. A piece of wood.
Absolutely.
Tony Kushner's The Visit, or Connie Comes to Town. So we have Chris's extremely long intro.
Right.
They do this thing where they wanted to throw in all the intro gimmicks at the beginning. So she does the little illustration with...
What do you mean foolish?
And then she talks about the Bible. She talks about some value about not wanting things that you don't have. And then it like moves on to another intro where Chris is bringing up like how the day is going or whatever. And then we get to John Avery Whitaker behind the counter at his ice cream shop, dealing with these ungrateful children and local hayseed. And he's really played as an imbecile early on in the show, Tom Riley.
Yeah, who sounds a lot like Ned Flanders.
Who is a city councilman and some kind of supplier for Whit somehow. I don't know what Whit is getting from a local farm, but...
Now, what are the actor who played Tom Riley, remind me, what are his big credits?
So Walker Edmiston is a very prolific voice actor. Many of these people are. Many of these people have extremely long careers doing voices. And Edmiston has a ton of credits on the original Star Trek specifically, including the most iconic role in the original Star Trek, I think, is Baylock. And Baylock is in an episode called The Corbomite Maneuver.
Right.
Where he is discovered to be this
baby.
marionette. Yeah, he's a marionette operated by Clint Howard with an adult voice. The marionette voice is actually Lurch from the Addams Family, but when they meet Clint Howard, his voice is Walker Edmiston.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
Walker Edmiston
that's
is
that's a great fucking episode of Star Trek, by the way.
Yeah, it's amazing. Walker Edmiston is also...
He was also a Texas Ranger, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Walker Edmonds is Texas Ranger, yeah.
He is also Papa Keebler of the Keebler Elves.
Oh,
or was.
what?
He's passed away in recent years, but decades of playing that.
So I do want to take a moment just to talk about that intro.
Yeah.
First of all, I love the part where she's talking in a super bubbly way about, and there was a guy who was beaten with whips 40 times. I was like, what?
Yeah.
He had to be lowered down a city wall.
Yeah, that's my other favorite gimmick of hers, where she sets up a riddle. But then, at the end, she's like, stick around and you'll find out which Bible character it is. And it's always super fucking obvious. Like, the kid who's going to be listening to Adventures in Odyssey already knows exactly who this is.
So then after the Chris's extended intro, we get to the theme song, which
slaps.
fucking, it's so good, isn't it?
It's a really good theme
It's
song.
so
I'm actually,
good.
Yeah, it's delightful.
Yeah, it perfectly encaptures kind of the mood of the show, and then like surpasses it in quality entirely. Right. It is a feast for the ears.
Well, and Adventures in Odyssey is a really unique product because it's incredibly well produced. And I've listened to a lot of radio drama in my day. I listen to narrative podcasts that come out today. I've listened to old-timey radio drama. There is something that Adventures in Odyssey figures out really fast and does exceptionally well. You're never confused about where anything is. It's never over-reliant on narration, and it's engrossing, and it's absorbing.
And that theme song too, like the orchestration of it, the arrangement of it, that you hear for the first few years, they recorded it.
They make it
in
better.
the mid '90s, and it's even fucking better.
It's got a lot of MIDI file quality to it.
And they got rid of that
Yes.
later on because they use higher quality synthesizers. Anyway,
What time period do these episodes take place in? That was a huge question I had.
they take place in real time.
So this is 1987.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Anyway, I wrote down on here, honestly, that theme song is my Star Wars. It has these really, like, it gives me goosebumps. I hear it and it takes me back to so many memories because we listened to the show, my family, on road trips. It was like the thing we listened to because you get a bunch of little shits in the back seat and you need them to shut up. The best thing you can possibly do is put on a radio drama because they have to shut up and listen. And so that is just that song is ingrained in my memory and it's really, really good.
Yeah, we would do that, but with the Potter books and James Patterson novels.
Oh, okay.
Which was, my sister and I learned a lot at a very young age.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
But
we would not do that with the Potter books, and neither would many of the parents who listen to Adventures in Odyssey.
Well, Brian, what was your relationship to Adventures in Odyssey growing up? Because I have none. I have no baseline for this, and I think you
had
both
you
grew up
heard
with
of
this.
it as a child?
No, not once.
It's not. That doesn't surprise me at all because this is not the kind of show that ever would have been listened to by Catholics. Like, it's just not. It's so Protestant.
No, but I had a lot of friends. Who were Protestant. Like, I grew up with a lot. Most of my immediate friend group, were all Protestant in my neighborhood, and they all watched VeggieTales, which I think ultimately was for the best because VeggieTales is great.
And VeggieTales kind of capitalized on what Focus on the Family had been building. Not to give them too much credit, but they deserve the credit here. Throughout the 80s, they were building up a big catalog of really interesting entertainment properties, including these radio dramas, including McGee and Me, which was a very well-produced semi-animated series.
Oh, interesting.
That you could get on videotape or 16mm film.
Was McGee the animated figure? Mm-hmm. What was that all about?
And it's good animation too. I mean, it's
a kid
solid.
who animates a Mick, and the Mick tells him about Bible stories or whatever.
Oh, saints preserve us.
I guess he's just Irish American though. He doesn't have an accent.
Like me.
So, but the thing that's worth noting too, I guess the point about VeggieTales is relevant though, because this was sort of from the late 80s to mid 90s was kind of the peak of like Christian alternative entertainment, because during this period of time, there was this idea that there was like the secular and the sacred, and never the twain shall meet, right? This is back when hardline evangelicals were still like burning CDs and stuff like that. And so there needed to be a Christian alternative to everything. The whole idea for Odyssey came about because of James Dobson. He wanted to, and this is from the website, he wanted to produce a high-quality drama series for the radio. He hoped that it would appeal to Christians looking for alternatives to Saturday morning cartoons, or simply families in search of wholesome entertainment.
And so it had started with some sketches on their regular radio, like weekly show. And then, they experimented and tried to make a regular running show. There's even some animated video productions of Odyssey. Those are not
very
good. But my experience with it was probably some familiarity with those tapes, and then also the occasional broadcast on Christian radio that I might happen to catch part of an episode of. And then we'd go to the Christian bookstore, and I could buy these volumes of 6 tapes with 12 episodes on them.
And that was the thing about the, to your point about like the tapes versus the radio broadcasts, it started out being something that was distributed directly on cassette tape. And also it was carried on a handful of stations directly affiliated with Focus on the Family. But in 1991, it actually moved to national syndication. And at that point, it was broadcast on Christian radio stations all over the country, because you could just very easily buy the package. You could put it right on your station. And Focus on the Family was, to the best of my understanding, making quite a bit of money on all of these entertainment properties for quite a while.
When they were working on producing this show, they got a lot of consultants to figure out how to make this show good, what to do with the writing, everything like that. And one of the things that they came across after they finished their 12 episodes was one of their consultants told them they needed a foil, not really an antagonist. They keep using the word antagonist in the behind the scenes stuff that I've found, but she's a foil. And what's going to be a foil for Whit? Well, someone who's exactly his opposite. She's an agnostic. Mm-hmm. She is a teenager. Mm-hmm. She is a she.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
She's every possible bad thing you could be, really.
Yeah, she's from the city.
And that is Miss Constance Kendall.
Right.
By the way, this is Bobby and Amanda. And my name's John Whitaker. What's yours?
I'm Connie Kendall.
Oh, so, Connie, you're looking for a job, huh?
Yeah, but just till I can get enough money for bus fare, I gotta get back to Los Angeles.
And so, to jump back into the episode, of course, we meet Whit. He's in the middle of a classic one-sided phone call. He says, "The police, that's who you are." And then, and then Connie walks in.
God,
right?
that phone bit is interminable. It's just constant
That kid is just shouting at him.
It's so bad. But Connie walks right in, and this is great for Whit, because Whit is a job creator and has been
he is
a job creator who in 4 years has not created a single job
until now. Instead, his hick friend Tom Riley has been behind the bar instead, and
who he doesn't pay. It's implied.
Hard to say. So
no, he's just his friend.
So Connie walks in, right, and the voice of Connie is an actress named Katie Lee. If you ever saw the show Totally Spies, she was the voice of Alex on that show.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Oh. Only for the first 2 seasons, though. When she started recording the show, she was 28 years old. And it's really wild listening to these early episodes, because her voice still has an incredibly youthful quality to it. It still does to an extent, but like she really sounds like a teenager. So, Whit.
Oh, and I should point out, Whit is played by Hal Smith, who was Otis the Drunk on the Andy Griffith Show. He was also Goliath in Davy and Goliath, which was an early faith-based program. I think it's a Canadian show. It was sort of a stop-motion animation where a kid and his talking dog learned lessons.
I did look up the actor who played Whit just to kind of see, because there were 3 of them in pretty quick succession, because they kept dying. But he claims that it's his favorite role he's ever done. Like that of his long career, like Whit was the shining star. And he really is the engine of this show. I just think it's a polluted, rotten engine that should be thrown into a lake, but it is an engine technically.
Well, and it's interesting because Whit does eventually change over time, especially when Herlinger shows up, especially after the Jack Allen episodes, because this Whit has an edge to him. He's a little bit mean.
Yeah.
He laughs at people when shit goes wrong.
He laughs at kids. He's like,
he's
supposed to be this guy who
makes fun of people.
It's great. I love it. And in the sort of asshole-ish nature of this Whit, Connie walks in and she's like, "Well, I'm just looking to get up to Main Street or whatever because I want to interview at the department store." And he's like, "Oh, really?" And then gives her the hard sell.
Why would you be interested in fashion?
Yeah, and gives her the hard sell for why she should work for him instead. She asks him how much he will pay her, and rather than just giving her a number, he's like, oh, I'll just call the department store and see how much they're paying, and I'll be good for it.
Yeah, he's like, I'll figure out the low ball here,
Bullshit.
and I'll just pay you that shit.
And you just see him like talking on the phone. That's your price, and you just can audibly hear the dial tone on the other end. They said $3.
So, Whit gives her the hard sell. She does take it on the spot, which also, is it really explained how Connie came to Odyssey of all places? Like, it said that she jumped on a bus.
She's there with her mom. And so the machinery of this episode is so funny because she's just like, yeah, I'm just going to go back to L.A., figure out what. And he's like, but your mom doesn't know. She's like, yeah.
Right.
And then some kid starts following her around. He's like, I'm going to get on the bus to L.A. too. And for some reason, that's a serious thing.
Women
as opposed
can't be
to
trusted alone on buses.
Especially not with children.
No.
Like, Whit just gets mad at Connie over it instead of just calling his parents and being like, your child might be thinking of running
It's
away.
so fucking good. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But so
he needs the labor.
Well, this kid is just sick of doing Bible bowls, which I fucking would be too. And I loved the Bible at that age.
Before we get to this fucking Bible bowl enthusiast child, we need to talk about like the first real conversation that Whit has with Connie. Connie is this worldly teen from LA. She's from the big city.
Big city.
She needed to get a little adventure. She's also implied to be like 17 years old. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Well, and this is very small, somehow very small town.
Very
Midwest.
small town. Like,
even though it ends up having a lot of things that even my not super small town doesn't have.
So then this comes up, right? You've got this kid, and this kid has a crush on her. He's like 8 or something. And she's 17, and she's planning on going back to California on a bus because I guess she got her jollies.
So we do have to establish she did get there with her mom. Her parents got divorced. Her dad's an alcoholic. Her mom moves to Odyssey. Again, who knows why. Apparently that's where the jobs are.
I missed that too.
I thought she just arrived in Odyssey.
It's not
like
established very well,
Okay.
but no, her mom is there, and her mom becomes a major character later on. But again, this script is one of the worst.
Which is interesting too, because the scripts become a lot more dramaturgically sound later on. Anyway, Whit finds out that this little kid has, a big old crush on her, as 18-year-old or as 8-year-olds often do. And Whit confronts Connie one-on-one and is like, this kid has a crush on you. That's your fault. How dare you do this to him?
You Jezebel.
You and your ways.
At one point, Whit says, new ideas are what this place is all about, and I almost threw my computer out a window. I'm like...
Well, because it's not new ideas in a lot of ways, but he's an inventor, which is, of course, not a real thing. No one's really an inventor, but Whit is an inventor.
Right.
Well, he has a corner for the kids to invent things, and then he just takes their ideas and then sells them as his own.
That's right. He's a capitalist.
He's a real Edison.
He is a benevolent capitalist.
He's a benevolent capitalist, exactly. So this is now her problem. She needs to solve this because she has created this problem by, slutting it up and making this 8-year-old horny for her. I don't fucking know.
The stakes could not be lower.
So Whit's like, well, I've got a plan for something, but it's gonna cost you.
It sure sounds like there's a lot to do in Los Angeles. Were you ever bored there?
No. In fact, I've never been bored.
I was never
at least until I
bored.
came here.
I know what you mean. All we ever do around here is have Bible bowls.
Bible bowls? What's that?
It's this game where Mr. Whitaker asks questions out of the Bible and 2 teams try to answer them.
You mean Mr. Whitaker's into religion?
Well, he's
Into
a Christian,
religion.
if that's what you mean.
Oh, brother. Now I know I gotta get back to L.A.
You gotta.
Look, he rolled really well as a paladin. He put it all in religion. It'll be useful at some point.
That's the full conversation that Connie has with this child. This is the thing that makes it her fault that he wants to run away to LA, which would be easily stopped by his parents.
I mean, the idea of a child of that age developing a crush on an older mentor figure is that's completely real.
Yeah.
But they take it in such a weird direction.
Super weird.
Yeah.
And it doesn't develop the idea of him having a crush on her. It's just like they say after the fact, oh, well, he got a crush on her.
Well, because then he keeps showing up at Whit's End because he wants to, see Connie, right? Which also is very believable. It's just everything else that isn't. Anyway, the Bible Bowl.
I would like to take just one moment to talk about the line, "I have never been bored."
Yeah, let's hear it.
Ever?
Well, no, like if you'd lived in LA, you'd understand.
That's right.
AJ.
That's right.
You know, it's different than San Diego.
Look, if she goes back to LA, the big city is going to corrupt her with all those tall buildings and jazz. But like poor Bobby, like he just wants to leave too. And it seems like this Odyssey struck me as like the Hotel California because no one can leave.
Bobby is one of a whole succession of children who I don't think ever returns.
Right. Yeah, early.
He went to LA.
Early on, that's another thing too, is that early on.
Don't look in Whit's basement.
Early on in the show, these kids, like the kids who they get in, the voice actors are not very good. The characters are not well defined, and they don't stick around. Later on, you do kind of get a revolving cast of kids who are more easy to identify with. But at this point, it was all still pretty broad. Anyway, it's the Bible Bowl now. And the Bible Bowl is going to start in a minute, one of Whit's famous Bible Bowls. And for some reason, Connie gets dragged up on stage to host the Bible Bowl because if she's there when the bus is supposed to be leaving, then Bobby can't get on the bus to leave to LA because Connie is at Whit's End hosting the Bible Bowl, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he can't get on a bus by himself because he's 8. But if he was accompanied by a teenager,
Connie. See, here's the thing about Bobby. That boy ain't right.
Bobby.
We have to talk about Bobby. I actually just imagined at the end of the episode, Bobby gets on the bus anyway, and I'm just picturing him sitting in like in an LA bus depot, just saying, "I'm in danger."
He like fucking is like walking down Hollywood Boulevard, being like, "This isn't what I was expecting at all."
There's so much jazz here.
The premise of the Bible Bowl too is that Connie can't pronounce these Bible characters' names, but Bobby is so learned. He knows the names of these Bible characters, and then he completely fucks the pronunciation of Abednego. He says Abendigo.
Yeah, I noticed that.
No, he's talking about
I
Until
never had
Dawn.
difficulty saying that name as a kid. That was always the thing with the VeggieTales, Rack Shack, and Benny that I didn't understand because I could always say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
My dad, and this is actually kind of cute, is that growing up, when it was bedtime, my dad would always say, "Shadrach, Meshach, and to bed we go," and then would pick me up and bring me to my bed.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Isn't that cute?
But I thought that's the villain from Until Dawn, right, Brian?
Yes. Yeah.
Abendigo?
Yeah. Abendigos. Yeah.
Who is this for?
This is for me.
Yes.
This is for Brian.
It's for me also.
This is the ending of the lives of others. This is for me.
So, but to the point of the pronunciation shit checks, that to me was so interesting because in a lot of ways it kind of summarizes a lot about the evangelical mentality, which is like you're either like with us or you're not. And if you're like on the outside looking in, if you can't...
Will you ever be more than you've always been? Tap, tap, tapping on the glass.
Yeah, exactly. Waving through a window. Except it's stained glass in this case, or maybe not
AJ,
because...
you are not old enough to play that role.
I'm not. I actually, I'm not bald enough either.
Right. Today's episode of The Worst of All Possible Worlds is brought to you by our sponsor, Ben Platt.
Ben Platt's billionaire dad.
Hey, did you see Billy Flynn's long halftime march?
So I distinctly remember in my upbringing, again, having grown up in a somewhat conservative evangelical upbringing, surrounded by a lot of people who were probably even more so. I distinctly remember thinking it was really funny when people couldn't pronounce biblical names because on the one hand, I was and am an asshole. And so like the whole thing of, oh, you don't know that thing, you fucking dumbass. But also with the biblical thing specifically, it's a way to like demonstrate your intellectual superiority. It's the same kind of weird thing that's reflected in, I don't know if you ever watched that terrible Great American Bible Challenge thing that was hosted by Jeff Foxworthy. I think it was like on ABC or something like that.
What?
It's a terrible game show where, and it's like all Mormons. Like all the contestants are Mormons. If they're not Mormons, they're Mormon adjacent, right? But it's all these nerds. And usually it's like the great aunt who's like the ringer. It's the thing of, I demonstrate my love for the Lord by how deeply I engage with the lore.
Yeah.
The lore in this case being the Bible. And it's like, fuck,
The Lord
it's
lore.
like Trek fans who, you know, debate the finer points of like how the warp nacelles work based on their readings of the, it's the exact same thing.
And it's not even that analytical. It's like the Trek fans who are just able to name, you know, which character showed up as the red shirt in Gamesters of Triskelion.
Right.
It's, you know, memorizing verses. It's being able to know the citation. Bible drills where they would say the name of a book of the Bible and you had to flip real fast to wherever Hosea was or whatever. It's just like this rote, because it's also that's like 19th century style education too. It's just this rote, like basic Americana way of doing things.
Right. Oh, I would just like to say the answer to the riddle was Paul, and I did not know that, but apparently Paul was just all about vibes.
He was.
Is what I got from the end of the episode. And also, I don't know why I wrote this note, but I think it pertinent to say that I wrote, give yourself to Jesus Daddy, give yourself to Jesus Daddy, give yourself to Jesus Daddy 3 times in a row. And I don't know why specifically at the end of that episode I wrote that.
That's kind of hot in a way. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's something there. And then the whole thing ends with the message of like, look, wherever you are, it doesn't actually matter where you are. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what community you're a part of. Life is what you make of it. And I just listened to that. I was like, I had to leave where I grew up because it was so much like Odyssey in many ways. Like it is.
Well, and it's like the idea is that you must be complacent, you must be grateful, and it's that kind of. Odyssey later on also has a lot of episodes about submitting to authority, even when it's unfair. Although it hits its breaking points in places. There is this undercurrent, especially in these episodes that we have, about being content precisely with what you have and not reaching any farther.
Yeah, or interrogating it. Yeah.
What's interesting about the body of the episode is that that's not the moral of the episode.
At all.
The moral of the episode is Connie's a big fat slut who seduced this young boy like a lady Svengali. And then Chris is like, actually, it's about the side character and how he wants something else.
Right. It is, Connie had to learn a lesson. Her lesson was, if you go out there and you're a little too friendly to 8-year-olds, you are going to be responsible for literally everything they do by virtue of the fact that you brought them into your orbit, you fucking slut. And it's just wild.
It is wild. And also, the episode actually is the antithesis of the moral that they present, because if she were able to make a home anywhere, couldn't she just do that in LA too? Why does it have to
where
be
she started out?
in Odyssey? Like
Because they love the Lord in Odyssey.
Friends, this episode is brought to you by Whit's End. Do you like trains? Do you like ice cream, but only the chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla kind? Do you need a place to abandon your white children? Then come on down to Whit's End, located on the ground floor of an old Victorian mansion built on the strong American foundation of brick, mortar, and the inescapable grasp of a shell corporation's shadow money. Come for the electric trains, stay for the creeping sense of dread that comes whenever you stare upon the no-no door. It calls to me. Something in the deep, burbling and roiling. I have to open it. I have to open the no-no door. Let me open it. Let me open it!
So moving on, we find ourselves at our first Christmas in Odyssey. And this is not a culture war episode. It's fine.
Cute.
It's like a kind of nice little episode. It's gifts for Madge and Guy.
It's madcap.
It introduces a style of Odyssey episode that is, 1, just ripping off some other story, and 2, Whit narrates it in a fractured fairy tales kind of way.
So we're introduced to the characters Madge and Guy. And Madge, by the way, is played by the same voice actress who plays Chris. Oh, and by the way, Chris, I forgot to mention this, was the voice of Barbie for a while as well.
Oh, interesting.
That's right.
Yep. She was Barbie for a few years. So that's Madge. And then Guy.
Klaus Barbie.
What?
Klaus Barbie.
No.
Well, fun fact, I went to elementary school with someone whose aunt was the basis of the model of Barbie. And she is also from San Diego.
Well, there you go. California knows how to party.
And then when you met the aunt, your eyes popped out of your head and you went, awooga, awooga.
So
That is, It's a medical condition. I really resent you both bringing that up.
So that's Madge.
As I said in my notes, if I had to sit through this story as Whit was telling it, I would beat him to death with sticks.
Right. And then Guy is played by Will Ryan, who would also later come back as Eugene Meltzner, who is a character that you have not yet met, AJ.
Yep.
And he is the voice of Officer David Harley, who is that cop.
So for Officer Harley, I actually have a little... I'll just play the clip from the next episode because I just want to give people the vibe of who Harley is.
And so I think you'll agree that the biggest single cause of juvenile delinquency in this country today is young people. Now, I realize that may sound like a generalization, but if you were to take a look at a cross-section of all JDs, that stands for juvenile delinquents, you'd probably find that most of them are between 5 and 19 years of age. Coincidence? Maybe.
So David Harley is a character that shows up later. He's very common in the first couple of years of Adventures in Odyssey. And he remains a character later on, but under a different name. You see, parents wrote letters. They were angry that this character was so stupid because of his job, and I have a clip of that too.
Officer Harley was an affable, bumbling sort of policeman who many parents thought gave a bad impression of how intelligent our police officers really are. So Officer Harley left Odyssey, and his shows were completely redone. Interesting, huh? Well, it just goes to prove what kind of impact your letters can have.
So Officer Harley is Odyssey's first victim of cancel culture.
Right.
Yep.
And the PC police got mad because they like the actual police. Right. Harley's episodes, many of them, they either cut the scenes that he was in just out completely, or when they were making the video series and didn't have time to write new episodes, they would remake older episodes that Harley was in and replace him with people like Eugene Meltzner or some side character that shows up once or whatever because they couldn't have an imbecile cop. For whatever reason, though, these episodes are all released fully intact on the tape releases because they were lazy or something.
And we've got the OG recordings, baby.
Yeah, well, I mean, it might be a cost thing, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and Chris doesn't point out in her little featurette there is that James Dobson actually personally saw to it that Harley would be removed from the series. Yeah.
Huh.
So this character played by Will Ryan shows up later. The voice gets improved a little bit, and he is now a private investigator named Harlow Doyle, and you'll probably see him in later episodes.
Interesting. I it's kind of sad because I think that was actually one of the best written lines in all 5 episodes that we listened to.
Oh, it's really good.
Yeah, you kind of want that character. Like you crave any comedy
if you get it
at all.
Harlow Doyle as a character is enjoyable. I think he's very reminiscent of. Have you played Phoenix Wright?
Yeah,
he's a lot like Detective Gumshoe. He's basically the same character.
Yeah.
Now that we've heard about Harlow Doyle / David Harley, again, that's voiced by Will Ryan, who is the voice of Guy, and he also plays it in a very elevated, silly place.
Right.
Now, something that's kind of interesting about this episode that I noticed is that the Foley is pretty bad. And it will get better throughout the course of the show. Like the production values really stepped up after the first couple seasons, but it sounds pretty discount in this episode. I mean,
part of that does sort of vibe with the Jay Ward cartoon feel of it.
Yeah, I thought that was an intentional choice. Is how it felt to me.
Because if you watch old Rocky and Bullwinkle or Dudley Do-Right or Fractured Fairy Tales, those sound effects are also very low quality.
Oh, I will say this episode actually contained the one time I laughed out loud in the entirety of our listen, and that was when the dad in the cold open, when the dad receives a tie. Again, he's like, "Oh, it looks like a tie box. Maybe this one has a giraffe on it." And that made me, I chuckled.
I got a couple laughs out of this episode, and it was mostly the what were basically Zucker Abraham Zucker jokes.
Say, honey, did you look here in the want ads?
Want ads?
No thanks, got some right here.
That
Speaking of conservative comedy,
killed me because I don't know, I just, I'm a big fan of that kind of humor.
I like the woman that just falls into the pit where the patio
that was
used
pretty
to be
funny.
and just stays
that was
there.
funny.
Yeah.
That would have worked better as a visual gag, but it's still pretty
this
funny.
episode also contained the line, "The Bible has no mistakes,"
Yes.
which okay.
It doesn't. Not a single
So
one.
this is what Chris says at the beginning, because she sets up another riddle like she does in these early episodes. She talks about, well, the Bible has no mistakes, of course, as we all know, which isn't really even like true Christian theology until you get to the 19th century of like any branch that, there's just not that kind of focus on like inerrant literal interpretation of scripture. And she specifically points to the genealogy in the book of Matthew and the genealogy in the book of Luke, and how those genealogies are both completely different from each other. And she says at the end of the episode, why is that? Well, because of course, one is for Joseph and one is for Mary. If you read those genealogies in those books, it's not fucking true at all. It's completely textually false. So she's quoting, essentially, she's using theology from John of Damascus, who was like in the 4th century, who did try to like make this like tortured reasoning as to how these two genealogies could come up. But there is absolutely no agreement with theologians of any century that that's actually a genealogy for Mary, mostly because it doesn't say Mary, it says Joseph, the guy who's not Mary. I mean, Joseph was a Mary, but that's a different point entirely.
Let's go.
Hey.
Okay, so give some magic.
That when I was a kid and I like went to my Bible and read those genealogies, that was one of the first big moments where I was like, wait, what the fuck is going on? What's going on here?
Interesting.
Who's fucking with me?
So go
I was assuaged of all of my doubts that perhaps a lot of the stuff didn't quite add up, because my dad would take us to church on Sundays, and my mom would get mysteriously ill every Sunday morning and would not go with us. And when I asked her, she looked in my face and said, "Oh, AJ, there is no God."
Oh my God.
And I went, "Oh, okay."
Incredible.
Well, and of course, the priest would always be like, "Oh, where's Kim today?" And my dad would say, "Oh, she's under the weather every single week." But the priest would ask every single week, and that priest was later transferred to a different church for very specific reasons. So
I'm sure they just needed the help at that other church.
Mm-hmm.
So
more souls can be saved.
I'm learning so much about your upbringing right now, Jay. Gifts from Madge and Guy, though, is ultimately it's just O. Henry's Gift of the Magi, obviously, straight up.
Yeah.
And it concludes with the classic thing of, well, I cut my hair so that I could get you the wrist, the watch band,
chain.
And but I sold the watch so that I could buy you the brush. And that's it. Like it's there's nothing else there. It's just kind of cute.
So I just wanted to set that up because there are going to be more episodes like that in the future. It becomes a vibe, and it's an example of just how the writers of Adventures in Odyssey will rip something off. In this case, O. Henry is conscious, and the very like Jewish humor is kind of unconscious. They don't really know that they're doing Borscht Belt.
Right.
And it becomes a major part of it becomes like a motif.
Because they're also not,
this
they're
like
not
constant,
from,
like unknowing Borscht Belt humor.
They're not from the area at all. Like,
no,
these are like California people. They don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird.
I think I never realized that the Gift of the Magi relies so much on the fact that you have to get somebody a gift. Like, you must consume.
Yeah. You
must consume. And also the entire, like, a lot of the jokes in it just sort of like aren't poor people funny?
And especially coming from Whit, who is clearly not a poor
No,
man.
as we learn later on, not to give it away too much, but
so Promises gets, I think, into what must be horrific life of Chris in a way that I don't think any of the episodes really capture, because she is forced to try and live a normal life while also like keeping the ball in the air of running this audio drama, like being this omniscient narrator character. And she's not allowed to go on a date without first talking to us about it,
right,
for an extended period of time.
This is her punishment.
Well, also there are hangovers in Odyssey, which blew my mind. Like I thought this would like kind of keep things on the level, but Phil is incredibly hungover,
he had
and that's
such
why
a good
he's
night
late to
the
the
night
date.
before. Exactly. Yeah.
He fucked his way through Odyssey.
That's right.
He got to his wits' end. He got to his wits' end. I was trying to make a dick joke.
He got to his wits'
end.
He got to his dick's end.
Yeah, he got to his dick's end. There it is.
Well,
that's the one.
Well, and that's interesting too, because then it's like, what's the balance of power there? You're writing these characters and then you're fucking all of them?
Why not?
Yeah.
Because Phil Lawler's one of the writers.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So Promises is again another episode where Chris sets up a premise about making promises. This episode is not about making promises. This episode is about, are we good or are we bad?
True.
And I'll start with the first of those clips here.
The hostage crisis. Negotiations with the hijackers broke down after the authorities refused to grant a demand that the Israelis release 14 convicted terrorists held in Tel Aviv.
Can you believe all the stuff that's going on in the world? Why does everything have to be so weird, so violent?
Mankind has been violent ever since we got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, Connie.
Well, we need to do something about it.
I am. I'm going to spend some extra time in prayer.
So
Thanks, John.
So as best as I can tell, that news bulletin is real. That seems to be from the mother's bus attack, which was a real thing that happened in 1988 when the PLO hijacked a bus and was basically, holding these people on the bus hostage. And it ended up with a bunch of Israelis being murdered.
Incredible.
Yeah. It's like, it's an actual contemporary event that is probably a little bit too heavy to be talking about with the intended audience of this show.
It's so specific too. It's not like Connie responding to a bank robbery or something. It's specifically like terrorism and Israel and all of this stuff. And Adventures in Odyssey never goes that far into Israel like politics, although there is definitely the evangelical fetishization of the modern state of Israel throughout this entire show.
Sure, yeah.
And this leads to Connie and Whit discussing like the problem of the nature of man and how could we solve these problems? Are people inherently good or are people inherently bad? Which is where we again see, and this is very much an old Whit way of framing everything. But this is what he says.
I think if we could just get all the people together and get them talking to each other, we'd be able to solve all the differences we have. I mean, after all, everybody's basically good down deep inside. And if all of us good people could just get together and talk, we'd see how much we have in common. And we wouldn't want to fight all the time, right?
Connie, that was a noble and wonderful speech. Unfortunately, it was also one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard.
He literally
and then
is
he
like,
says, people can't just
so
change.
good.
The message of this episode is people cannot change based on internal factors. They have to turn their hearts over to the Lord, which I'm praying about.
And he will change it for you. Like,
yeah,
you
which
can
is
never,
still,
you
which
can
is the
never
exact
be better.
same argument.
Yeah, you can never be better. You can never get better. So why try? Yeah. Why truly bother?
This is also a really weird interpretation of the Calvinist concept of total depravity, which holds that, humans, due to the fact that we are inherently sinful, cannot redeem ourselves. But there's a pretty big difference between that theological concept and what Whit is saying, which is basically you are doomed to forever be shitty, no matter what it is that you do. So why even try to
You are always a real fucked up dude until you become a Christian,
and then that
it can be
fixes
worked on.
Everything. It's a bizarre.
Well, and I would say Whit wouldn't even argue that it fixes everything, but that you can't even start working on improvement unless you have Christ in your heart.
Correct. Yeah, that being a Christian is a necessary condition for self-improvement.
And he uses the example of those children, right? I don't have to tell them how to be bad.
Which
they can do bad all by themselves.
Which, by the way, connects really interestingly to Dare to Discipline. That is basically the thesis of James Dobson's Dare to Discipline, which is that, if you don't tell kids what it is that they need to do, and you drill that into them. Don't let them ask their own questions. Don't let them do their own thing. Set limits and beat the fuck. Well, you don't beat the fuck out of them. Beat them until they cry genuinely.
Well, and it's worth noting that in Adventures in Odyssey, there is never any endorsement of corporal punishment.
Right.
Never.
That's true.
And that is by design. They are trying to make the friendly focus on the family thing.
Yeah.
Even though there is an episode where James Dobson shows up in Odyssey and Whit tells him how much he loves Dare to Discipline. But
well, there's a fucking surprise.
Of course he did. Let's have this guy interact with more children. I think it's just such a dangerous reading of scripture entirely. Like as a person who grew up Catholic, like this idea of original sin, right?
Yeah.
Which I think it sounds like he's mostly referring to that, like, it's this thing that's constantly in you and nothing you can do can ever cure you of that original sin. But I think that, at least in my interpretation of original sin, it's just that everybody fucks up.
Right.
You're born to fuck up. But as long as you atone and like try and like be better, then you can be forgiven for that sin.
That's a very Catholic way of looking at it, though, because
born to die, world is a fuck.
World is a fuck. However many dead cops. No, but that's a very.
I am trash man.
I'm trash man. This goes back to the whole question of like works versus faith, and the Calvinist idea is faith alone. It is on faith alone through which you are saved, and there is literally nothing that you can do that will, make your stock better. Because all of that is determined by God, and by the way, is also predestined.
It just seems like it goes out of its way to justify violence against other people because everyone is inherently bad, so we can forgive killing them, which I think explains Whit's bloodlust. I think a little bit later on.
Bloodlust.
This psychopathic 3 ice cream flavor having motherfucker who thinks that war is worth it if you get your name on a statue. Fuck you into the sun.
We will,
Whitaker.
and absolutely.
This is the first piece of Whit's backstory that we get to, where it gets explained to Connie that Whit used to own an encyclopedia publishing business.
No, isn't that in Recollections?
It is mentioned there too, but it is mentioned first.
Oh, I
here.
missed that.
Yeah.
Which, to me, sounds like a CIA front.
Right. Well, and obviously going back to the 3 ice cream.
And, let's not talk about that yet.
Going back to the 3 ice cream thing, by the way, little known fact, that Whit's CIA code name was in fact the Neapolitan. That's a joke. So...
How do you have an ice
he's
cream
from Naples.
shop?
He's actually an Italian.
Right, he's Italian, which
spy.
Explains so much.
Mint chip or nothing. Fuck you.
So
it's a gelato shop.
Says, well, why can't we all just like get together and talk about it? And wouldn't we all be able to figure it out? Whit's like, no, you
we'll just
fucking
have so much in
idiot.
common.
No, obviously not.
You child.
And then Connie says, well, you know what? I can prove it. I am going to sign a promise, hence the title. I'm going to write this out that I'm going to, quote, treat everyone I meet with kindness, gentleness, and patience from now on. And Whit is basically like, Connie, you are full of shit. It's going to be so funny to watch you fail. And from there, then, at that exact moment, by the way, some kid walks up to the ice cream counter and is like, I want ice cream. And Connie just says in a way that is far more polite than anything you would ever hear in New York.
Yeah. Well, she says, I'll be with you in a minute, okay?
Right. But then
which in the Midwest is you could get executed
that's
for that.
actual fighting words.
That's
That's like what are legally defined as fighting words. Like you could actually get off in court.
Wait, why?
I don't know. It just
it's the
it's
tone.
The tone. It's a tone
It's
thing.
that okay.
I see.
Don't
okay.
bother me, as opposed to how may I help you, sir? Service with a smile.
What was so funny was like I didn't even clock it.
$3 an hour.
I literally
service with a smile.
did not clock in that moment that what she was saying or how she was saying it could be perceived as in any way rude. And then Whit was like,
well, it's because you lost your faith, Josh.
And then Connie's like, oh, I mean, yes, let me help you. And then Whit is basically like, ha ha ha, I knew it. And then from there, by the way, we go on from here to Whit reading from a book of riddles to these kids. What Connie then does is Whit's like, well, would you like to read them one? Connie takes the book and reads them a riddle about an electric train that is going somewhere. Which way is the smoke blowing? The smoke doesn't blow because it's an electric train, obviously. Connie gets really upset with these kids because they're fucking stupid, which they are, by the way. And
hey, they have excellent mathematical skills. They didn't even use paper.
And it's portrayed as being somehow problematic that she gets frustrated with these kids. And I just wrote this out. Connie is right. Like, justice for Connie. Can you imagine having to deal with these kids every day?
Absolutely
and
not.
Like the way this man is hectoring her, he is her boss. She is a part-time employee with no benefits.
He is, and that's the thing too, right? It's like he is setting her up clearly to fail in this situation. Hectoring is exactly the right word for it. He is trying to piss her off. And
yeah, but he makes a point about why he should do that, because it's like, oh, you're only going to be patient with people who treat you fairly is the thing he says earlier. So clearly he's like, he's really trying to like test the boundaries of her morality. His main characteristic is apparently to feel superior to children. That's really what I've got.
Children of all ages. And I ultimately don't understand how or why getting frustrated is in any way an indication of one's moral compass. Or like culpability to sin, that just doesn't track for me at all.
And then Chris comes in and is like, the real problem is that Connie made a promise. Don't do that.
Do it.
Never make promises.
Don't dare do it. And also, the idea that Connie would never have, before moving to Odyssey, because she was like living in LA, the idea that she would never have encountered Christians, for one thing, which is heavily implied, if not stated outright, or two, that she would never have confronted anybody with like a small town mentality, and it took going to Odyssey for her to experience this, is ridiculous. It's absurd.
No, I think it makes sense because of all the jazz clubs she's going to.
Yeah, and the tall buildings, Josh.
All those guys have to sell their soul to the devil at the crossroads.
Have you considered the tall buildings?
It's a no Christians environment.
Sorry, you're right.
Fuck. Well, and that's the other weird thing is because usually in narratives like this, it's you came from the Big Apple, right? You come from New York City to a small town. But LA is so interesting because it really does feel, LA is it's just a bunch of suburbs that kind of like slammed all together. So why LA would be like the cesspool of like, you know, godlessness in a way that New York is so often portrayed? I guess it's because he's from California.
I think that's it.
He's from Point Loma.
Right.
Well, and I think it is also like an image that we have of LA in the 80s.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that, you know, the 70s New York was kind of the face of crime. The 80s roll around, especially the late 80s, shows like Cops are usually like in California. So I think we start getting this vibe of like LA crime being the center point, being the thing that like the TV news stations cover because they're in LA. So like the image people start, and gangs are of course operating at a much higher level in Los Angeles than they are in New York.
No, I think,
and so I think there is something to that time period and how that ties into Los Angeles as this boogeyman.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because like in the cultural imagination, what is New York in the 70s? Well, it's Saturday Night Fever, right?
Sure.
What is LA in the 80s? I can't think.
Reservoir Dogs.
Is it Reservoir Dogs? I mean, like.
Or like Boys in the
Hood.
Hood.
Yeah. It's Boys in the Hood,
Yeah. So then we hit Recollections.
Yes.
Recollections. I got a good clip right here, right at the beginning.
Great.
So where is Whit?
Oh, he's at the cemetery.
Cemetery? Did somebody die?
Yeah. Whit's wife, Jenny.
Yeah, but that was years ago, wasn't it?
4 years ago today, as a matter of fact.
Just not the best way of relaying information to this young girl.
It's very like exposition.
Yeah, just trying to spice it up a little.
The police, that's who you are. It's just that thing again.
Okay, so before we get into the meat of the episode proper, I had a question about the cold open that perhaps you two could explain to me.
Okay.
Probably not.
What the fuck What the ever-living fuck? Who are these people with these accents? And because I literally wrote, oh, the accents have cometh. Because all of a sudden you have a very dim Swede, I guess, who is just like, I left the pipes on.
Yeah, I can explain this.
Who do they come back? These characters?
No. This whole idea, like the first episode has this plumber who fucks everything up, and then Chris tells him he's basically Abraham Lincoln. Like this entire premise goes away relatively by the time we get to that Vietnam War episode. They have stopped doing that.
Which I do think, by the way, is to their credit. I mean, like they knew what worked and what didn't, and they clearly were like, yeah, this just does not work.
I thought this was going to be like a Bert and Ernie kind of situation.
This is actually a pretty well constructed episode.
Mm-hmm. I will say that. Yeah.
It knows where it's going the whole time. It covers a lot of ground and it does it pretty well. That sketch absolutely detracts from every minute of it.
I think they just felt they needed like a moment of levity because of the heaviness of this episode.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So we're introduced in a flashback to our straw man character, Mr. Glossman.
Oh, by the way,
Glossman's going to be very important.
He's going to be really
too.
important. But just to go back to the whole thing about like the sort of weird attitude that Adventures in Odyssey has towards its non-Christian characters. Which Philip Glossman is clearly one of them because all of the bad guys in Odyssey are not Christians. There are no bad guys in Odyssey who are Christian.
Interesting.
It's a town that's like 95% Christian, and then the 37 people who are not Christians are all very evil.
I'm going to show you this image, and I want to know what you guys think about this.
Okay, so one, this is a character who disappears around like 1994 and 95. And this art style is something they don't pick up until like the mid 2000s.
Right, this was clearly retrofitted.
Drew all of these characters up in this horrific art style.
How do we feel about this man here who has this large nose and these hands that are sort of clasped?
It is the happy merchant.
It's insane.
He is the happy merchant. He has these very prominent eyes. He has big lips. This is not a character who is given any kind of indication that he's Jewish, which
nothing in the vocal performance.
No.
Certainly.
He's just like a weedy,
he's just a shit.
like
he's just a shit, basically.
Anglo-American dude.
He actually
I have no idea that this is how they
than
depict
anything
him.
else. You're exactly right.
Yeah, he's super waspy.
Yeah.
It really, he has all of.
I cannot believe this picture.
Wild?
Jesus Christ.
This is really gross. Yeah.
I'm going to put it away now.
It's terrible. That artist should be shot.
I agree.
Yeah.
But because you're exactly right. Like the character of Glossman is this waspy guy who, again, I don't know how the hell he found his way to Odyssey, but he clearly grew up from the way that he speaks. And I actually think that the performance itself is pretty good. Like he does a good job of capturing like the feeling of a sleazy guy who you can't trust. But he's clearly come from the East Coast. He clearly has, he's just somebody who thinks about things primarily in terms of capital and acquisition of capital, which is also interesting because, Focus on the Family has always been more on the social side of the culture war.
Focusing on the family.
Right. Whereas it's organizations like the American Enterprise Institute, for instance, who are very much bedfellows with Focus.
Yeah.
Who are more on like the policy, free markets, that kind of side of things. But they are kissing cousins. And so I thought it was really interesting how much this episode sort of focused around this idea of, well, we've got this community center here that has been part of the community for a while. They want to basically pave paradise and put in a parking lot. And what does that do for a community? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. And it matters because of what is going to be put in. Right. The answer to malevolent capitalism is benevolent capitalism, right? It's not anything else. And of course, it doesn't end up being owned by the city and only costing it, quote, thousands of dollars.
No, it ends up getting owned by Will's shell company.
It gets bought up by $3 million by Whit's shell company that ostensibly produces encyclopedias.
Right. $3 million.
$3.5 million in a teeny tiny town in the middle of nowhere. That is an absurd amount of money.
Yeah. And I love the part where where Jenny, John Whitaker's wife, Jenny, she is trying to save this rec center. And she brings up the fact that what's going to be brought in, what's going to happen if they bring in this mini mall? It's going to be arcades,
video rental stores. Yeah, I love that.
And pool tables.
In your community.
Right. So the problem is not that capital itself is eroding. It's social degradation. I say
first, medicinal wine from a teaspoon and then beer from a bottle.
Right here in Odyssey.
Does he tell jokes from Captain Billy's Whiz Bang?
Oh my.
Does he buckle his knickerbockers below the knees?
So
trouble.
So just to kind of like track back a little bit though, and again,
these kids are going to play Night Trap.
I have one last fun tidbit about Mr. Glossman. The voice actor behind Mr. Glossman, none other than Ray Liotta.
Although, actually, the voice actor is Paul McCusker.
It's Paul McCusker, yeah.
Who then becomes probably the strongest writer for Adventures in Odyssey.
And is a pretty good voice actor. I think that his performance in this episode is honestly probably the most believable to me. Like, it feels the most grounded. And it's like, this isn't, in a lot of cases in Adventures in Odyssey, and you'll see this, especially the way the Glossman gets presented later on, it's very like mustache twirling. Whereas here, it's like just a guy who is, he's an antagonist, clearly, but
he's just a guy who sucks.
He's just a guy who sucks. He's not evil.
Right. But there, I mean, because it reminds me of Kevin Sorbo's role in God's Not Dead a little bit, because like he accidentally is so good arguing that point that you're like, oh yeah, well, he's the protagonist of the movie, and there's this dumb shit kid who keeps interrupting this class. Like I felt that way about Glossman.
Yeah.
I'm just like, yeah, no, he's completely right. This is going to generate so much revenue for the town, and there's going to be a nice hangout spot for all the kids.
Wow,
like,
I didn't expect you to go to bat for Reagan-era capital, AJ.
Look, we
do better.
It was. I mean, I'd rather them go to a shopping mall than hang out with this warmongering, bloodthirsty psychopath.
Right, who beats kids.
Also, at the beginning of this episode, we find out a little bit more about Whit's history. That he is also an award-winning teacher.
Right.
Whitstory.
Who he taught for 13 years and then retired after winning an award, which I guess was after the encyclopedia business.
Right.
I would assume he was fired for quoting the Bible every 15 seconds.
If he teaches in public school,
they took prayer out of schools and he couldn't do it. So he retires about 4 years earlier, so about 1983. You can assume at this point he's in his 60s, right? If you think Whit was maybe born in 1920, Hal Smith himself was born in 1916. So this is an old fucking guy. 13 years of his life was spent teaching. X amount of time was spent running an encyclopedia business. There's also the implication that when the boys were young, he was writing the encyclopedias, which he wouldn't have been doing if he was just like chairman of the board of this encyclopedia company.
Right, like he worked his way up from writing the encyclopedia to owning it,
and then worked his way up to being an elementary school teacher.
Well, and of course he was a CIA asset the entire time too, as we will later learn.
What the fuck are you talking about?
I'm not joking.
Josh is incorrect. He is not CIA.
Oh.
He is NSA.
He's NSA, sorry. Yeah.
What? He was also a missionary for some time, and he is also an archaeologist.
Right.
There's a lot that's happened in about 65 years of his time on Earth.
He's a real Renaissance man.
I mean, have there been multiple timelines explained in the Odyssey universe?
No.
There aren't multiple timelines.
No, it doesn't get retconned ever.
Yeah.
They don't really say like, oh, Whit, now you're 100 years old.
Right.
But nothing has ever gone back and said, no, he wasn't a teacher after all.
Right. So it's not like The Simpsons where like every 10 years they have to make Homer and Marge be 90s kids and then, 2000s kids and so on. Okay.
Right. Only 90s wits will remember this.
Canon is not a huge concern for the writers of the Adventures in Odyssey universe. Let's put it that way.
Well, one canon is their concern. The 66 books of the Protestant Bible.
That's right. So
that's the canon that matters.
We learn about Whit's dead wife, Jenny. Jenny died. As we find out.
Jenny dies of a strep throat infection.
Which, by the way...
That gets to her kidneys?
Can happen.
Which is a real thing. But I remember...
But it takes years.
And it's not going to happen to somebody living in, with reasonably good medical care in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to happen.
She dies 3 to 4 weeks after her strep throat. this is like a process that takes a couple of years. But it made me always really terrified.
Same.
If I had a strep throat, I was like, I have to get the swab. I have to make sure it's strep so I can treat it with antibiotics so that my kidneys don't fail on me.
Well, and I grew up, so I as a kid, I got strep throat all the time for some reason.
Oh no!
Eventually, I got my tonsils
Okay.
out. Yeah, eventually, because I just every other week, it seemed like I had to stay home from school for a day or two because I kept getting strep. And so I did get my tonsils taken out, and then I was like, oh, thank God, now I finally won't fucking die of strep throat.
I also actually kind of like that in this four-year-old flashback of Whit. Whit's End is still a pretty new place. In the flashback, it doesn't exist yet. And he's actually kind of a big piece of shit.
Yeah.
It doesn't really line up with the award-winning teacher thing. He's like a businessman first and foremost. He's a bit of an asshole. Yep. He completely agrees with Grossman. He doesn't want the fucking rec center around, especially after his wife dies.
Glossman.
He's just sick of it. He's bitter.
Yeah, Glossman.
What did I say?
Grossman.
You said gross.
You saw that
well,
picture.
You know what?
Look, he's a pretty gross man.
He's very gross.
He's disgusting.
He's a gross man.
He's disgusting. I find him. He offends my sensibilities. So
I really like that aspect of his character. Like he's still actually trying to learn how to be the benevolent capitalist that he wants to be.
Yes, and in a lot of the it's sort of written in such a way that a lot of the way that he's feeling is, yes, partially it's that he's an asshole. It's also partially that he is dealing with the bitterness about his wife's death. And ultimately there's something about it of because he hasn't come to terms with it yet, he doesn't want to be anywhere near anything that reminds him of her in any meaningful way. And she's the one who wanted to save this rec center, whereas Glossman was the one who wanted to demolish it and convert it into a bunch of video arcades. And her passion for this project is, I think that the one thing that's written pretty well about this at the beginning of this episode is that she really is portrayed as being a very forceful advocate. And she is pretty, it's like, okay, you have a good head on your shoulders. And also I can understand why a guy like Whit would fall in love with and stay with this woman. Yeah. She clearly has qualities that complement his qualities very well. And after she dies, he no longer has that balance. And as often happens with people, he just kind of retreats into bitterness. But then, of course, what happens is that he goes to the rec center and there's a little girl playing there with her dolls. And it's like, hey, mister.
And then she tells him that her name is Jenny.
Her name is Jenny.
I have several. Okay, so the thing about Jenny being an activist, I think, is very interesting because it actually, I think, justifies dramaturgically a lot of the stuff that was happening in Promises. Yeah. Because he's just like, why would you ever try? You'll just die of strep. Don't change yourself. Yeah. Don't actually interrogate
Don't try to
anything.
change the community. Just pray.
Yeah, because the last time somebody tried to change the community, his wife died. Yeah.
Sure.
So you see that sort of being built in there, and it makes Whit into a little bit more of a complex guy. Yeah. I still hate every fiber of his being, but at least I kind of get it more with this episode. I also appreciated that this is a Jenny that dies of a very specific disease. Yeah. And I would imagine that I guess Spielberg looked at listened to this, and then he's like, well, I'm gonna have my Jenny die of a completely unnamed disease. And so I appreciated Adventures in Odyssey, at least for clarifying how their Jenny
Whit
died.
kind of is the Forrest Gump of the evangelical world.
The
more we dig into his backstory.
Let's unpack that.
I don't want to yet because you're going to have to discover more of who Whit was.
I agree.
This also is the first hint of the backstory of Whit's End as well. So we know it's an ice cream parlor now. It also has other rooms where kids invent things, maybe.
And electric
and that
trains.
It used to be a rec center for 40 years. This building is older than 40 years. This is just to give you the image, because it is in all the artwork from the beginning. This is a Victorian mansion, AJ.
What? I pictured an old-timey saloon. Yeah. With the doors and everything.
No, it is a red, 3-story Victorian mansion, and that is also going to be important in the future.
The interior of Whit's End in the ice cream parlor does kind of have an old-timey saloon feel, but the building is massive.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know
like an
if
old soda shop.
I don't know if it's big enough to be worth $3.5 million in 1988 in the middle of nowhere, but it is worth something.
I want to run the numbers about how much money that would be.
Well, I think the property
nowadays.
also includes a large chunk of McAllister Park.
Oh, okay. Right. So Whit's heart obviously is melted by this adorable little girl named Jenny, and the battle is finally joined in one of those classic last-minute moments where, they're having the meeting, and Glossman is like...
More like Grossman.
You're
just thought of that just now.
That's pretty funny.
On purpose.
Yeah, that's really funny. Glossman is like, well, looks like it passes. The motion gets seconded. And it's like, well, if there's no further objections, I guess we're just going to pass this measure. And then, of course, at the very last minute, Whit throws the door open. Everybody goes, ah! And then Whit's like, wait, I come with and I'm picturing him in my head, holding up the certificate in the manner of all of those old movies. And it's like,
it's like twice as big as it should be.
It's like, I have in hand here a signed document certifying that the Universal Press Foundation of Chicago is willing to buy the lot in the building for $3.5 million.
CIA front.
It's definitely not CIA. And so, and for some reason, this money then is in fact used to buy the thing, which then, of course, again, brings Whit's End under the auspices of what is essentially his holding company.
This is also the introduction of Sheriff Moorhead, and I had questions about that, but I
think it's also the last appearance of Sheriff Moorhead.
I don't even remember that.
Well, he wanted more head.
So... So Whit successfully secures the land, and then I'm
just imagining as Whit is doing this whole thing, Tom Riley is just sitting there behind the desk for the council, just making the soy face.
Oh, I was thinking, I was picturing him behind the counter sucking Whit off.
That's why they call him John Avery Moorhead.
Oh, Jenny.
Also, child Jenny never shows up again, right? You'd assume she'd go to Whit's End every now and then, but
no, she's a ghost.
She never
she
actually might
at
be
all.
a ghost. For all intents and purposes, she is a ghost.
There are no ghosts in Odyssey, but there are angels.
Right, so she might be an angel. Fun fact, by the way, Focus on the Family owns the domain name universalpressfoundation.com. If you go, it just redirects back to Focus's website. So here's the thing that I kind of wanted to say to sort of pull this episode together that I noticed. That this episode is really about, again, modernization versus this sort of nebulously defined traditional values, which is love of God, love of country, small-scale hometown benevolent capitalism.
Love of the soda shop,
coming up against turbocharged late 80s Reagan capitalism. And
with yuppies, full-blown
yuppies, people like Philip Glossman, who are basically coming into these little towns and taking this land and, basically taking it for the purpose of
video rentals,
arcades, turning it into more readily monetizable assets. And to me, this jazz. And to me, this has a really interesting parallel to what's going on literally right now all over the country. We, of course, are in a place where in many small towns now, people are moving in from places that are wealthier, better off, and oftentimes bringing with them social attitudes that are maybe not so friendly to the people who live there and have lived there for a long time. As an example, Boise, Idaho. I think that housing values have gone up by like 60% over the course of the past year or two.
Jesus.
And most of these people are moving from California. They are bringing with them, for the most part, liberal values, a desire jazz, a desire for.
And you know what happens when you bring jazz to a place? It attracts bees.
I wanted to conclude this point by saying this is happening right now all over the place, and the tensions around it look exactly the same. Yeah. And it is these places that are bastions of old-timey conservatism that are now reaping the turbo financialization that has happened over the course of really the past decade, with real estate increasingly becoming a preferred asset class. This culture war is top of mind for so many people, and it hasn't gone anywhere. And it looked exactly the same way a decade and a half ago as what it looks like right now.
Well, I think it's also fascinating that what Whit turns the place into is also something that I don't think Jenny would have wanted. She wanted a rec center, so why would he just not build a new rec center? Why? I mean, the answer is because he thought that he could do better than a rec center could, because he himself would be the sole savior of every single child in Odyssey. But like,
well, and the rec center didn't have a Bible room.
It's really fucked up that he was just like, I'm going to honor my wife's legacy by doing the opposite of what she wanted.
And I also love this idea, this is more of the bigger background radiation of all this, is that like, this is a Midwest town. It's a tiny Midwest town. It's easily assumed that everyone goes to like the first Reform, the second Reform, the third Reform, the fourth Reform, the fifth Reform, the second Baptist, the third Baptist, the fourth Baptist. Don't ask about the first Baptist church.
There are 5 Reforms?
Like 95% of this town is not only Christian, but Protestant.
Yeah, no Catholics in Odyssey.
And yet, the Christian must always be the missionary to the town. And they are always, therefore, oppressed by the larger structure of what this town is, even though everyone is clearly on their side. Even within this totally fictional world, you can see where that premise is just dissolved.
Right. And it's what you were talking about, I think, earlier, Brian, about how Connie had never met a Christian out in LA. It's this idea that there's a scarcity to Christianity in America, that there are good Christians, but they're all in small towns. Well, there's not a single one.
And she says in her letter
cities.
to her friend back in LA, he's Christian, but don't worry, he doesn't shave his head and go to airports.
Yeah, I saw it too. I was like that's
the
not
Hare
Christians.
Krishna.
That's the fucking Krishnas. What are you talking about? Those aren't Christians.
Yeah. That letter sequence is actually really weird. It's like it sounds like she's like has a crush on Whit for a little bit of it. And
well, if
like,
she does, it's his fault.
Yeah, it is.
For being a slut.
It's not Whit's fault for being a slut. It's her fault.
Yeah.
For
being a slut.
For being a slut. Exactly.
She's a slut either way.
Oh my God.
She's slutty coming and going. Even though I know for a fact John Avery Whitaker is a big old butt slut.
And more like bottom C. Listeners, is your caller lonely? Do people look at you and have no way of immediately knowing you're an animal lover? Do you like horses but wish they could be longer? Then might we recommend the silly opulence and stylish puckishness of the giraffe tie, made by this week's sponsor, Giraffe Ties, the company that makes ties with giraffes printed on them. A giraffe tie is the perfect gift for dads who think they already own enough ties featuring the pliable, athletic necks of one of nature's sexiest mistakes. These wacky neck danglers feature candid shots of the majestic Maasai giraffe, whose deep, bottomless black eyes will burrow into your soul and make your coworkers exclaim, "Whoa, that guy sure likes giraffes!" But you don't. You don't like giraffes. You love them. And they love you. So buy a giraffe tie today. Giraffe ties. Their tongues are 20 inches long.
We are on our last episode of this bunch, and I just want to start this one with AJ's reaction. Again, AJ has never even heard of Adventures in Odyssey until hanging out with us, I believe.
And this was, you said, AJ, you accidentally listened to this one first.
I did, in fact, listen to this one first.
So this episode, I'm just going to give the name, The Price of Freedom.
So I'm coming into all this pretty cold. Cindy opens us up at the top of the episode by...
it's Chris?
I'm sorry. Chris.
Cindy Grossman.
Cindy Grossman. Chris opens the episode, and her voice strikes me as the perfect combination of a bedtime story voice and also a robot about to turn on you in an Asimov story.
That's a really good way of putting it.
And she says,
Part of what makes each of us unique is the fact that we all have different tastes.
We sure do.
Take hobbies, for instance. Mine is baseball. Yours might be reading or sewing or, well, just about anything. But Kirk McGinty has a really unusual hobby. War.
Okay, you have to understand that going into this as the first episode that I listened to, I was like, what? Like, it was so much crazier than I thought it was going to be. I wrote, this is almost satire. How is this almost perfect satire? Like, from the get-go.
Yeah, it's like a moral oral episode.
Yeah.
It really is. And it's just like this is a completely normal thing to be, is to have bloodlust.
I was a bit of a war kid back in the day. Like, I enjoyed playing tactical battle, mostly like PC games, right? Like, tactical battle simulators. I really liked that stuff. I read books about World War II. Like, I get what that thing is. It's just the way that it's framed is so weird.
War.
Yeah, because it's not his interest. He doesn't like reading about
hobby.
it. It's his hobby.
His hobby is committing war crimes.
A little bit later on, he goes outside and he meets up with his friends, and all of them run up to him and say, "We're playing guerrilla warfare," and you're like, "You're what?"
And then you find out all of those children do a war reenactment every year for Memorial Day.
Oh, it whips.
From just not Civil War. It's whatever war they want to do.
Just any war.
It could be Korea. Yeah. It could be the Spanish-American War.
That one's my favorite one. But no, they play like this fantasy sequence, right? This war sequence where he's throwing a grenade into an enemy encampment, I think. Mm-hmm. And they've put this like circus ass underscoring underneath it that is absolutely like bone chilling. Like, this is like all fun and games that all of these people are being murdered. But it presents itself, at least for, I think, the first 50, until Whit puts his stupid face into other people's business.
Your face when you're talking about Whit, by the way, is so good.
This is amazing, right? It's just like, this is why I love to introduce this show to a non-Protestant as an adult, because then I get to see this reaction to the kindly grandfatherly man who I always had such deep affection for as a child.
You're supposed to love him. Love him.
Right.
He is the best. He is the best
he
of
has
us.
He has a tremendous like voice. Like, he has a great podcast voice that like tricks you into thinking that he's saying good things, but for the most part, it's really vile and gross. He for the first 15 minutes, my first time listening to this, I'm like, wait, is this show actually like anti-Vietnam? Right. Because they make the point so well.
Yeah. The teacher, whose name is Mr. Altman. Like Robert Altman,
it's Robert
the
Altman.
director
It's literally
of MASH.
just Robert Altman.
Oh, I didn't even put that together.
I thought liberal Kevin Sorbo teacher is named after Robert Altman.
Why did they just make it Glossman? Like, that's my question. Like,
because Glossman's a different guy.
They're both straw men. So just make them like have one like guy who's the straw man.
Again, they get better at that later on.
And this teacher is once again the stereotype of like the liberal, coddled, out of touch, far too intellectual, doesn't care about his kids, is only interested in
asking a lot of questions.
Exactly.
They have that whole exchange at the top where he's just like, I'm going to give you this book that will teach you. And the book is called Vietnam, the Real Story, which, sure, I guess. But when he tells the kids that they're not having homework that weekend, I really loved the Foley work there of the kids going, it's like, I'm going to give you all an assignment. And they're like, oh, but they keep the Foley going. Yeah. And it's just like, you're not going to have one this weekend. And it goes immediately into yay.
Yeah.
So it goes, oh, like in one sustained clip. And I love it. I will also say that most of these episodes, like overall of Adventures in Odyssey, can be improved by adding this scream into the background of any group scene, and it is as follows. Because it vastly improves every scene. If there's just some guy in the background who's like really super, a little too aggressively into everything that somebody is saying, that's one of my favorite like tropes in anything, and I think it really adds to anything that they're trying to say. But they have this whole conversation. He and the main character, our protagonist of the episode, Kirk McGinty, who sounds like a surly bartender in a D&D game. He's just like, but my dad died in Vietnam, and he can't be a monster. He was a soldier. Right. Don't you understand? That means he can't have killed people.
Yeah, I've got this clip.
On March 29th, 1971, a court-martial jury convicted Lieutenant William L. Cowley Jr. of the premeditated murder of 22 South Vietnamese people. Well, he may have done that, but my dad would never have killed innocent people.
And it's such a setup. It's like, it's worded, like the placement in the episode and the tone of it is like, oh, this is going to be a dramatic irony when he finds out that his dad actually is a fucking child killer.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I think that would have actually been more interesting, like an interesting lens to look at it through. But the writers of Adventures in Odyssey are not interested in interrogating that at all about,
or even leaving it ambivalent. Like, this is not an episode that would ever be, well, did he kill a kid or not? Was he one of the quote unquote good ones, or was he a war criminal? In fairness, this is a show for children, but like, it actually gets pretty intense.
They're entertaining this very difficult question in the first place.
Exactly. It's like a really intense episode, I think, for like, I don't know, an 8-year-old to be listening to. Kirk was like, he said something to the effect of like, so what? Did everybody who died in Vietnam, did they all die in vain? And Robert Altman is like, yep, they did. and then
it's true. It's true.
They should have ended the episode right there. But then, yes, he gives the book. That's the clip where he reads it. And by the way, when I was like, oh, Vietnam, the real story, what, they're not gonna like fucking talk about My Lai, are they? And like, that's the first thing they talk about.
They jump right in. I really wanted to give him, I wanted like Kirk to take the book and be like, Ho Chi Minh, a biography. Yeah, read that.
And so then Kirk ends
William
up...
Drucker knows what the fuck he's talking about.
Kirk ends up getting attacked by the guerrilla warfare kids, and then he tells him he doesn't want to do the reenactment. They're like, why are you being such a cuck? And then he goes home to his mom.
By the way, before they do that, though, they call his dead father a coward. They're like, well, what's the big deal? Did you read this book and it turned out that your dad wasn't a hero after all? and then these kids later on are like, well, we don't know why he's so mad at us.
So he goes home to his mom after his friends say that his dad is a cuck. And his mom says this.
I guess I thought by moving to a small town like Odyssey, I could protect you from all the bad attitudes people had about Vietnam.
Yeah, all the bad attitudes.
It would creep in sooner or later.
If only we could protect ourselves from bad attitudes.
Yeah, because we shouldn't question whether the war itself was justifiable. Mm-hmm. It's a war that happened, so it must be.
In America, it was not only did it happen, America was
and far worse than his dad dying is that there's bad attitudes around the thing that killed him.
Right.
Yeah. I thought he was gonna be like, Mom, can you tell me the story of the last time you saw Dad? And I wanted to lean down and say, oh, the last time I saw your father, he was dead.
So then, yes, and then yes, he goes. She goes on. Kirk's mom goes on to tell the story of the last time that she saw his dad, and apparently he died during the Saigon airlift.
Yeah, he was on the he didn't make the last chopper out of Saigon.
This also, in terms of timing, given the year that this aired, which again is 1988, I believe, this would make Kirk. Yeah, and this would make Kirk about 13, which tracks with how his character is written.
Yeah, I think they call him a 12-year-old boy.
So what I realized then is that the Saigon airlift would be closer to when this episode was aired chronologically than the Second Battle of Fallujah is to today. Just to really give you a sense of how recent the Vietnam War was in the American memory at the time that this episode aired.
Yeah, but that's also interesting is that Kirk he's young for a kid whose dad died in Vietnam or served in Vietnam at all. He is way on the young side. You're kind of past that generational point where most of those kids are adults now and not listening to focus on the family radio dramas unless they have a small child of their own.
Obviously, he wouldn't remember any of it because, of course, again, he never knew his father. As it's written, his mom was pregnant when she left Saigon and was carrying the kid at that time. You know, Dad looked her one more time and like she saw the love in his eyes or whatever. She came back to America.
And she was on the second chopper out of Saigon. Yeah. She was the second to last chopper out of Saigon. Yeah. And then the other one left and then he died.
Right. They make it sound like Saigon was just like this like zombie swarm fucking World War Z moment. Where
I mean, that's how it's portrayed in popular media, to be fair.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
And And the way she tells the story too, it's in a very soothing, like ASMR voice.
It's a bedtime story, and he falls asleep, and then has this nightmare about his dad.
Let's hear it.
Captain Steve McGinty has been found guilty of murdering 22 innocent Vietnamese people.
Where his teacher, Mr. Altman,
he didn't do it.
convicts him of war crimes.
A lot of innocent people died. Innocent people were killed.
My dad didn't do it. He was a soldier.
He was a murderer.
No! He was a soldier. Why not both?
But then I wrote, like, this is actually, again, really intense for a children's show.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And by the way,
that's what I always appreciated about Odyssey as a kid was that they went to this kind of place.
And by the way, this is not the most intense episode of Adventures in Odyssey. Where they got to, particularly like in the mid 90s, there's some really intense shit. And
very dark stuff.
I can't wait.
And so then we have this scene where Whit goes and visits Robert Altman. Well, and so like Whit brings up this idea, we live in a small town. We still believe in honor. We still believe in this kind of stuff.
Here in Odyssey, we still take words like honor and duty and heroism very seriously. They still have a meaning here.
Not like in your big cities with the jazz.
With your jazz jackrabbits and your buck bumbles.
This whole episode is this America as death cult. It does not matter that the teacher is right. And it kind of accepts the position that the teacher probably is right. You just don't say it. You just don't say it to the kid, which I think that's valid. You don't just tell a 13-year-old child that his dad sucked. But like you just don't say it in general. You never ever offer the criticism because how fucking could you?
It's fascinating to me that Mr. Altman, the only way he can question the war or have negative feelings about it is if he had someone immediately die in it.
It's the Kevin Sorbo God's not dead thing.
It is literally, I had that exact same
Sorbo
thought.
believes in God, except that I think the position that Odyssey gives him is more complex and something you actually have to wrestle with, as opposed to Sorbo in God's Not Dead, which is the most simplified. And it shows where Christian entertainment has gone from the 80s till today.
Oh, agreed.
This still gives it wiggle room, and it makes him, like, Sorbo is never sympathetic. Even though he gets saved at the end or whatever, you never like him.
Right.
Mr. Altman here, you're like, oh man, fuck.
Yeah, and especially the way
he lost his brother. He was an artist.
And
like,
it's
Jesus
the way
Christ.
he says it too. It's like not only did he die in fucking Cambodia, which in many ways was even worse than Vietnam, and more horrific.
We didn't even have a stated reason for being there.
No, we just did it because
like,
Henry
we didn't even
Kissinger said that we
have some
should.
fake story about
and
it.
it was just like, and for what? The world lost an artist because of that. And you know, Whit's response is, "We all lost people. Fuck you."
That's where you learn about Whit's oldest son, Jason,
and
who
he'll
died
come
in
back.
Vietnam.
By the way, he'll come back.
He'll be back.
Well, Jason died.
Sorry,
because
not
he
Jason.
ran out.
His oldest son is Jerry. Jason is his younger son, who's still alive and is also in the NSA.
Oh, I thought Jason died because he ran out in front of a car while you were calling his name in a shopping mall.
No, that was Heavy Rain, but I can see why you were confused.
At what point in Adventures in Odyssey did they just yell Jason?
Yeah, Harlow Doyle is actually the origami killer.
Oh no! Well, at least we finally have all these years figured out.
Private Eye is the last thing you hear as a fucking ice pick is shoved through your temple.
So, AJ, what I'm curious about is because now we've kind of like we've served up what the conversation is, right?
Yes.
Whit comes in there. He talks to Robert Altman. I want to hear kind of your take on what that conversation is, how you felt about the back and forth, and just kind of what that felt like for you.
I am immediately suspicious of any adult who describes themselves as a friend to a child.
Yeah, fair.
He comes in and he says, and he's like, "Oh, are you like a relative?" He's like, "No, I'm just a friend." And I'm like, no, well, then why the fuck are you here? Stay out of the business. Like, it'd be one thing if the mom came in and was like, hey, so like, you know, my husband died in Vietnam and maybe there's a way we can talk about this. It's a little bit more nuanced than everyone there died in vain. Like, you know.
Or like Whit going and talking to her first and then her saying,
talk to the
could you
kid's
talk to Mr.
mom.
Altman?
Like, don't.
Like, yeah, do you want to do anything about this? Yeah. Not just take it upon yourself to go and harass this poor man
who just moved into town,
is dead, who just got here, and Yeah, honor and duty and all of these huge words that mean all this stuff. Like, look, I will say that I am not anti-war in every circumstance. I do think that if there are, like, I do think it's good that we all stopped the Nazis from killing people. Do you know what I mean? And I think that is good and necessary, but I think that foreign policy for the most part is reinforcing colonialism. Well, and Vietnam was just all about reestablishing a colonial hold on Vietnam.
I think a lot of that framing has grown far more prominent in our lifetimes, where before it was definitely there in the opposition to the Iraq War. Like, this idea of being against war meant being a pacifist. Right. I would not call myself a pacifist. I do not think that any war the United States has been engaging in my lifetime or my parents' lifetime was ever in any way justified. And to go further, I believe that every enemy that the U.S. fought was justified in fighting us. Because we have an understanding of war that's based on colonialism, that's based on the size of our empire and these frontiers that we have to maintain at every corner of the planet.
I think it's fascinating that the only war that I think a lot of people agree was good, World War II, like going and freeing, the concentration camps and beating the Nazis, that was the one that the U.S. fought most to not be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was the one we had to be dragged in kicking and fucking screaming to defend. And every war that we've leapt into willingly has been colonialism.
And
basically.
Even then, the whole inciting incident of the U.S. involvement in World War II was deliberately a result of our colonialism in the Pacific.
Right.
And specifically the Philippines.
There is 100% a world in which Japan didn't go after the American territories in the Pacific. Hitler just kept doing his thing.
Yep.
The Soviet Union fell to the Nazis. America continued to stay out of the war, and Nazis continued to increase the size of their already substantial foothold in the United States. There were fucking Nazi rallies at Madison Square Garden, and people forget about this.
It's terrifying, but I think one of the big things that you hear the struggle of in this episode specifically, what they're really wrestling with is they want to put the veterans from Vietnam into the same box that they put the veterans from World War II, and how even to this very hyper-conservative mentality that they struggle to do so. That there still is a struggle to justify why all of these
And that's what really leads us into the conclusion of this episode, which is the Veterans Day or whatever, where Kirk's mom
with a K. Kurt is a different character, and he's a little bit more of a recurring character.
Yeah, I remember
Kirk McGinty, who, little known fact, is voiced by Ray Liotta.
Right. That joke just keeps getting better. So,
one of these days you'll be right, AJ.
Oh no!
He's the fourth Whit.
Oh God, can you imagine? Kirk's mom shows up at this thing, and she delivers basically the keynote address, the ribbon cutting speech or whatever, because they've got this Odyssey Veterans Memorial that they are opening, and she delivers a speech.
She describes the Vietnamese people as grateful, and also says that they, as in the American soldiers, paid that price for us.
The price of freedom.
For us. For
the
you
price
and me.
Of freedom. And
here in the United States, that's what Vietnam did. It made us more free.
This is the only way that you can square that circle. This is literally the only way. And it doesn't hold up under scrutiny, but in terms of a self-contained thing that at least allows you to maintain internal logic. Because what happens in this moment is that she reads a letter from Kirk's dad, and he says in it, look, people are going to say things about this war, and I fear that some of them might be true. But when I saw and heard the Vietnamese people, South Vietnamese people telling me that, we were granting them freedom, that to me made it all worth it. And so you need to...
Yeah, they got their freedom by storming Saigon and turning it into Ho Chi Minh City.
And
correct.
I would really recommend to anybody who's listening to this to check out, if you haven't, the podcast Blowback with Noah Colton and Brendan James, which does a fantastic job of unpacking this really propaganda and showing the lie for what it is.
And it's so fascinating because this propaganda works so much better today because they were able to tie both of the wars into 9/11.
Right.
And 9/11 was a real thing that happened to Americans on American soil, to people who did not deserve to be hurt or killed. And thousands of them died all at once. Vietnam had nothing like that. Never at any point. And so it was so interesting to me when I heard this episode growing up, or when I went to high school and we would read letters from people who were pro-Vietnam and things like that, how much this same narrative was there, because it was like, based on what? You didn't have a 9/11 event. You didn't have anything that felt like it threatened your freedom in any way, and yet somehow we're fighting for freedom. What is that? Of course, it's the domino theory.
Well,
but
the Gulf of Tonkin, right?
Right. It was remember the Maine all over again.
It's the latest in a grand tradition of American false flags attacks.
And it was less convincing. I mean, like, the Vietnam War was so deeply unpopular. Like, it's what cost the Democrats their election in 68. It was never like the blitz of constant positive media that we saw for Iraq and Afghanistan,
Iraq, which again, blowback
where it
covers
was just like 90%. It was just everybody always just pushing both of these wars with all of their breath. And so this is part of this project here in this Vietnam episode of Odyssey. These days, we just kind of brush Vietnam and Korea away as much as we can. But this was part of them trying to craft a new narrative. Many years later, they're saying, well, now people are starting to ask questions. Now people are starting to say, oh, this wasn't very good. Now people are cucked. They weren't cucked before, and they certainly weren't cucked here in the Midwest, in my Victorian mansion that serves ice cream to unsupervised minors, and parents just trust me with these children coming here all the time. But my teenage son died.
There's blood on your scoops.
And we'll see a further justification of this in the Jason and Jerry episode that happens in kind of the mid-90s, where it's just like, fuck the hippies.
But it's all worth it to get your name on a statue. And
Absolutely.
I think
Absolutely.
that's weirdly the moral of the whole thing, is that it's like, your brother died and that's tragic, but look, his name will forever be on the statue here, and he is part of our town, and he is part of our history. And that's such a crock of shit, because that brother could have made such beautiful art had he not been dropped into the heart of Cambodia.
Probably fucking napalmed by his own Air Force.
For no reason.
I didn't remember how this episode ended. I actually thought that Whit was going to like leverage community pressure to kick this teacher out of Odyssey, which is not how it ended.
No. And that's something you would see
That's a very Springfield
in an evangelical movie made in the last 15 years.
Exactly. But
it is not the focus on the family brand from the 1980s.
And the thing that ultimately is able to unify John Avery Whitaker with Robert Altman is that they both ultimately, at the end of the day, are grieving a loss, but they love their country. And that is the thing that brings them together, because that force of patriotism is, along with the family, which we focus on, the thing that binds us all together. And if you don't have that, you don't have anything.
Society is structured based around the nuclear family, and any other aspect of society that works is an outcropping of that specific structure and that specific value of making every family this way. Heterosexual, well-behaved, regular church going. Mom doesn't get a headache every Sunday.
You know what cures mommy's headaches are wine.
And we stop those cuck teachers in their tracks.
Look, I hate to compare everything to VeggieTales, and I promise I won't spend the majority of this miniseries talking about VeggieTales and hyping it up too much.
I won't stop you if you do, honestly.
Also, the VeggieTales guys have way better politics.
Yeah. No, they're very. It's good because VeggieTales, I think, taught you how to be a person in society. It taught you how to have this faith in this thing, and I think all the best parts of that faith too, while simultaneously being silly and funny
not being
and
aggrieved, not being like a part of this war where you're being persecuted for being a vegetable. That follows Jesus.
Adventures in Odyssey is sort of epitomizes why I could never get into a lot of the Christian-tainment that all my friends had to like endure growing up, and it's because it's so dull. It's so boring and so one note that, and also just genuinely mostly unfunny. I think is a huge slide against it. And where VeggieTales proved that you could tackle this material and still be funny. I'm just very adverse to anyone coming in and moralizing when it's really none of their goddamn business. And Mr. Whitaker has me at my wit's end.
Hey, all right.
Well, this has been The Worst of All Possible Worlds, the podcast. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
And I'm the worst of all possible Brians. And I just want to say one thing.
What's that?
What's that?
More like Grossman.
Yeah, that's a good point. Bye.
Play that jazz!
All right, thank you for listening to the first premium episode of The Worst of All Possible Worlds, the podcast. The introductory voice at the beginning of this episode was Josh's spouse, Ann Houston. I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors, who are of course not the No-No Room nor giraffe-shaped ties, but all of you, our patrons on Patreon, including but not limited to Aeneas Hemphill, Ben Ferber, Benjamin R. Alford, Dominic Russo, Nate Netzley, Octavia Immersive, with a special thank you to Nicola Donov and Ashley Stoneman. Thank you for listening. We'll be back.